Hello, I'm Marianne Matzo, and I'm your host for Everyone Dies. Usually you hear, only here, Charlie and I talking and doing our podcast, but 2 weeks ago I had some major surgery in my abdomen, and I have been out of work for a while, and we had pre-recorded some shows, but not enough, and the time is kind of slipping away from me, and I don't know where it's going, but we thought it'd be kind of just easier tonight if we tried doing a video, which we haven't done before, and talking about a couple of things, just you and me. And see how that format works, just, for now because of my surgery. And I have papers all around me, which I normally don't have, and Sandy gives me a hard time if I rustle them, so I'm going to try not to rustle them. So tonight, I want to talk to you a third part of our series on looking at assisted death or medical aid in dying. This podcast does not provide medical advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording. So I'm Marianne Matzo. Charlie is somewhere in New York, probably eating a cannoli or something like that, having a martini. And we'll be back together for our next recording, but like I said, because of the surgery, I'm all discombobulated. In our first half, we're going to be talking about pound cake possibilities. In the second half, I'm going to talk about a mom who decides to request medical aid in dying and how that goes with her family. And in the third half, I think we're going to probably all be ready for a break and a pain pill and maybe going to bed. So, let's get started. So, we always like to talk about food. Well, I always like to talk about food. I think Charlie's right in there with me, but I was reading an article today about it's about whiskey and cognac and pound cake. Go figure. So I'm putting that link in the resources. You can read the whole article. But this is talking about pound cake for funerals. And so we have a recipe on our website of a pound cake for funerals. And so from this article, which is called Pound Cake Has Heavenly Status in Black Households, but Roots of Affection Remain Obscured. In the beginning part of the article, they're talking about how pound cake's like really in every Black household, according to K.J. Kearney, who wrote this. But when the author was trying to find out, well, what's the origin and why pound cake, nobody was able to tell him. So, but what they talk about in here is funerals, of course, can be very sad, but they say, and I'm quoting, for Black people, death is also seen as a reason to celebrate, not because of the loss of life, but because of the deceased's transition to his or her heavenly home. No more having to prove one's humanity to white supremacists. No more enduring the hardships of wealth disparity, environmental racism, and police brutality, nor any of the historical opposition that Black people have had to face for hundreds of years. We call funerals homegoings because we feel as if our loved ones are finally free from the trials and tribulations of this earthly calm. Many Black Christians have always considered this world a stopping off point on their journey toward the ever-loving arms of their Lord and Savior. And of getting to hang out with God, Jesus, and any dead relative that you haven't seen in a long time isn't reason for celebration, then I don't know what is. But you put all of that with a good pound cake, I think I could just be there. So they're talking about how to make pound cake in here, and I don't want to go overboard on pound cake, but it's so interesting to me. It says the historic ingredients list for this well-known cake require very little understanding of math or actual culinary skills. Most ingredients lists I found going back to the 1700s ask for a pound of all the major ingredients. Well, that could be easy. So I don't know if this author is a male or female, but they say, take for instance this recipe from a 1747 cookbook, The Art of Cookery, Made Plain and Easy. Hannah Glees calls for the following: a pound of butter, beaten it in an earthen pan. Oh, beat it in an earthen pan. Have your hand one way till it's like a thick cream. Then have ready 12 eggs, but half the whites, beat them well, and beat them up with the butter. A pound of flour beat into it, a pound of sugar, and a few caraways. I've never in my life had pound cake with caraways, so maybe I'm really missing something. That's it. I mean, this recipe's ask the reader to store all of it by hand for an hour before baking. I think that'll be a barrier for me. I guess it's creation in Northern Europe. Some people take the cake's origin to England. But pound cake has been made like this, it says, for literally 100 years. So the author was then going around to different Black bakeries and friends and family saying, what's your recipe for pound cake? How do I go about getting it? So, long story short, as I moved forward, somebody who owns a bakery in the family says, what I always tell people when they ask me for a pound cake or a pound cake recipe is ask your auntie. So, armed with this Miss Richardson's advice, my next call was to my family designated pound cake maker, Aunt Jean. Honestly, baby, I don't know, she said when asked about the reason for her pound cake making. She laughed. It's like that story of the young lady, the ham hock, and the pot. For the uninitiated, the story my Aunt Jane refers to goes as follows. A little girl watches her mother cut off the ends of the ham hock before putting it in a pot. Seeing this done her whole life, she finally decides to ask her mother, why did they do this? Mother shrugs, telling the little girl, go ask your grandmother. When the little girl inquires to the grandmother shrugs and says, I don't know, ask your granny. When the little girl asks her great-grandmother why they cut the tail off the ham hock before placing it in the pot, her grandmother says, oh, that's simple, because it couldn't fit in the pot that I had at the time. So Aunt Jane's response is similar. It's just something we've always done in terms of making pound cake, and nobody ever asked why. But she talks about how if it's a baby shower, graduation, a wedding, a funeral, you're going to see pound cake. So we we'll post a recipe for pound cake. If you have your own special recipe of pound cake and you want to share it, that'd be great. Even better, you can send me a pound cake. I would do that, but God, if you could figure it out, that'd be great. You can reach us at everyonedies.org. Email is mail@everyonedies.org. See, I don't need Charlie to make myself laugh. I amuse the heck out of myself as it is. If you have any ideas that you want to share with us about programming or topics or guests, let us know. We really would love to hear from you. So this article, and I'm really not a hoarder, I promise I'm not. But this is from Oprah Magazine of March of 2010. Yes, you heard that right, 2010, 11 years ago. And I cut it out and saved it for use. Excuse me, my nose is... I cut out and saved it for use with my college students in my online course, and I guess I didn't really ever figure out a good way to use it, but I thought it was a great story, so I held on to it. And I'm also in a constant state of cleaning things up, getting things put away. You know, when you work for 40-some years, you collect a lot of stuff. So I've been going through and getting rid of that. But this article is called Imperfect Endings. And what I thought I would do with you is do sort of a Reader's Digest version of what the story is about. Fill in with some of the things that we've been talking about in terms of medical aid in dying and assisted death. And hear from this perspective of the mother and the daughter. So here's the story. This mother lives, I want to say, in D.C., and she has at least two daughters that I can figure from the article. The article's written by one of her daughters who has a young child. Mom, who's requesting the medical aid in dying, has a whole list of medical conditions, which I'll read to you. And what Zoe writes about, the author's name is Zoe Fitzgerald Carter. She writes about this last kind of period of her mom's decision and what happens. So let's just read it together. Think of it as a nighttime story. So her mother, she's given her daughter her bath. Mother calls on the phone and says, can you come to DC the first weekend of February? And the daughter says, I'm not sure. I have to check what's up. And the mother says, well, gosh, honey, I've been trying to find a good time to end things, as you know, and I was hoping that weekend might be good for you. I haven't called your sisters yet, but of course I want them there too. And your girls, if you can bring them. I'm still working out the details, and the daughter says, Jesus, Mom, you could sound like a family reunion. And so the mom says, you don't be huffy about it. I just want to know if you can make it. Any of you with adult daughters, you will recognize the conversation. Any adult daughters, you will recognize the conversation. So this daughter Zoe says, well, I'll call you by tomorrow. So, so that's January. So in March, the daughter Zoe goes to DC to meet up with her mom, and she does a little reminiscing about her mom and what she was like and how she sort of came across kind of shy, but in reality she wasn't at all. And so the two of the sisters, Hannah and Zoe, are talking, and Hannah, who lives in Toronto, says, or isn't in the area anyway, says, I can't do that. And she doesn't want to take her 2-year-old on a flight. And so there's this discussion about how are we supporting Mom, and Mother's going to be going to this doctor's appointment to see if she can get medical aid in dying. And she says, well, what about this Hemlock guy? And Hannah, one of the other daughters, says, you mean Death's little helper? And so they tried to make light of the situation list between them, but it goes on where Hannah says, I'm not going to be there and be involved with this. So she gets to her mom's house. They start talking, and she talks about the list that she has to make to go see the doctor about what her medical conditions are. And this is the list. My mother has congestive heart failure, asthma, chronic pulmonary disease, osteoporosis, arthritis, low blood pressure, which causes her to occasionally and unexpectedly pass out. But Parkinson's is still the biggie, and there's no question it's getting worse. Several times she's experienced brain log jams that rendered her temporarily speechless, and has recently begun experiencing bouts of dyskinesia in the form of uncontrollable writhing, indicating that her Parkinson's is advancing and it's harder for her meds to control it. Her daughter says to her, I do know you're sick. It's amazing that you're still around. And the mom says, right. Well, of course, that's the problem. And there are very many situations, actually, where you can have one part of your body that's vital for life, but that part's not working too well, but all the other parts are working great. And so you say to yourself, well, if, I had an entire long list of things that could possibly go wrong, I can kind of wait for those to maybe kick in terms of not wanting to go to the end of this disease. So in the thing that's really giving her the big problems is the Parkinson's. And the Parkinson's, because it's degenerative, because there isn't a cure for it, is going to continue to get worse. She knows that. And she's saying where it is right now, it's not good. And so that's what that discussion is like, is she going to wait for her heart to give out? Is she going to wait for something else to go bad when the Parkinson's is rolling down that hill and picking up some speed? And so that can be part of that whole issue that people think about. And I think it's important, I know that this is the third part in our series, I think it's important for us to look at, why do people say that this is what they want? What are the choices once they say that that is what they want? And have they exhausted, I always look at it as exhausted other palliative care options prior to saying, not waiting for any of that, I want to end my life. And in order for you and I to make good decisions, and we talk to our friends or our parents, is to really understand what are the issues. And you can't have a good, intelligent conversation if you don't know what these issues are. What are some of the options? So that's why we're talking about it. Also, I'm talking about this today. So they go off to see the doctor who would be able to prescribe the medical aid in dying. So they go in, a tall, white-haired man appeared and waved us into a larger, comfortable room. So he said, "Why don't you tell me while you're here?" My mother's jeans-covered knees did a little dance at the edge of the sofa, where she perched, looking precarious and uncomfortable. It took several throat clearings before she said, "I wanted to talk to you about ending my life, or at least about having the option to end it." You listen to our second podcast on the medical aid in dying. That is really the bigger issue for a lot of people, is to be able to know, I have this prescription. I can use it if I want to. And so, because we don't know how good something can be, and we don't know how painful or difficult it can be until we're doing it. And so sometimes if you wait till it's like, oh my God, this is not working, it can be a little bit late for getting any medical aid. On the other hand, you can get this medication and come to find that palliative care really does a really good job, and you don't ever really need it, but you got it if you need it. So he says, "I understand. Can you tell me why you might want that option?" My mother glanced over at me and I nodded encouragingly. She said, "I'm 75. I had Parkinson's since my 50s, and I'm sure, as you know, it's a degenerative disease. Things have gotten much harder for me in the last year. Even walking is getting difficult. I belonged to a Parkinson's support group for many years. Several of the people in my group have died. Friends of mine. They were in very bad shape at the end, completely helpless, really. I don't want to go through that." And that's what happens. People will see situations where friends or family have gone through treatment. Now, mind you, the treatment might have been 30 years ago, and they say, "I don't want to ever go through that." And so part of the discussion really that we need to have, from professional to patient, is to say, 30 years ago, now wait a minute, it's a whole different story now. And so judging what was happening any time in the past is sort of, unfair to the present. Find out what the true now fact is before you make a decision. So I don't want any of that. You might still say that, but at least inform yourself. So she says they're in bad shape, completely helpless, really. I don't want to go through that. He says, "Let me ask you something. Would you say you're depressed?" Now, in any law where there's medical aid in dying, remember, medical aid in dying is where the state has passed a law where a physician, based on a list of criteria, can say, you qualify or you don't qualify for what would be a lethal dose of medication. And so depression is one of those that we can treat. And so if it's depression, let's treat that rather than just say, well, throw the baby out with the bathwater sort of thing. You know what I mean? So the mom answers, "No. I do feel lonely sometimes. My husband died a few years ago, and my children live in other cities, but I have friends, and I don't believe I'm depressed." Then he turns to the daughter, and he says, "How about you? Do you think your mother's depressed?" And the daughter writes, she says, I wanted to say, yes, of course she's depressed. Why else would she be talking to you about ending her life? But I simply said, no, I guess not. I would say my mother's unhappiness is pretty reasonable given her situation. And he says, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a prescription for Seconal. And you're going to hold on to those. And you can get it, filled when you want. And then you're going to get your second refill 2 months after that, and another refill 2 months after that. And at the end, you're going to have 60 pills, which will be enough for you to end your life. And he says, do you have any other questions? I'll answer those. And the mother doesn't, but the daughter who's writing this article says, well, I have a question. I'm not exactly clear how you make the decision to give or not to give someone a prescription for Seconal. And he says, that's an excellent question. I don't give prescriptions to everyone, but your mother is dealing with a very serious disease that, as she knows, is going to worsen over time. I don't believe she should have to live any longer or suffer any more than she herself wants to. She seems to be completely mentally competent and fit. If I had any questions about this, I wouldn't give it to her. The woman you passed on your way in here to come for the same thing, and I said no. And the daughter asked, well, why? What'd she want it for? And he said she was recently diagnosed with a degenerative eye condition that will eventually lead to blindness. She was upset and she didn't think it was the right time. Oh, but I didn't think it was the right time for her to make such an important decision. And the daughter in this article writes, so do you think it's the right time for my mother? And he said, yes, I do. So what happens is, so remember, you get 20 the first month, 22nd on the second month, so it's 3 months of sort of stockpiling pills before you would actually use them. Which makes sense if, you see what the situation is, see how quickly you progress, whatever. But, so what month was that? Why do I keep losing track of the months here? So that was in March. So March, April, May, June. So this goes, the next time period here is July. And the daughter is there with her mom. And she hasn't eaten for 12 days. And she writes, according to Dr. Harmon's pamphlet, cessation of food and drink was a relatively quick and painless way to die, and less traumatic for the family than the sudden ingestion of drugs. The fact that she had attempted and failed to kill herself with an overdose of morphine 4 days earlier is all but forgotten. Death is finally underway. I'm not clear from this article what happened to the Seconal, what was the story with the morphine. All we know from reading this is that the mom has said, I'm not going to eat or drink. And it is when you're at the end of life, like if you said to me, you're not going to eat or drink for 24 hours, I don't think it would work well for anybody. But when you're at the end of life and your body systems are starting to shut down, that loss of eating and drinking is not missed. And in fact, people get kind of annoyed if you try to push them on it. And so we're going to, I was going to say, so that's another story. But what we'll do is we will post the Artificial Food and Fluids podcast that we did. So you get, a sense of what it is to die from when you're very, very sick from not having food and fluids. And so the daughter lays with her mom and sings a variety of songs that she learned as a child. And she's laying there, and then she says, and then I stop. Something feels different, something subtle, like a shift in temperature or a sudden absence of sound. Sound you've only been vaguely aware of. I look around the room trying to identify what's changed, but it looks the same. Everything is tidy and it's in its place. Her papers are put away. The visitors' chairs are pushed up against the bookshelf, and the oxygen tank is unhooked and sitting in the corner. I look down at my mother, her profile etched darkly against the pillows. Is it her? Is she dead? My eyes move down her body, find the gentle rise and fall of her ribs. Relieved, I put my hand alongside her arm, feeling the hardness of bone, but sense no answering frequency, the being there, the usual answers she gives to me when I touch her. The responding presence, her presence, is missing. Like a background hum that dropped away or a breeze that ceased to blow, leaving only still air behind. Good night, I tell my mother. I love you. Again, I have to look carefully to see that she's breathing. The other sister, Hannah, comes into the room and says, "Are you okay?" And she looks at me with a look that I can't interpret. I wonder if she also feels the unsettling absence, but I'm too exhausted to ask. I'm fine. I want to stay. You go on. Wake me if I will. A few hours later, I bolt up from bed before Hannah can speak. For a moment, we stare silent at each other, and then, still without speaking, I grab my robe and follow her down the stairs. My mother lies on her back, her mouth and eyes both open. I'm not sure why I woke, Hannah says, standing beside me, but I noticed that her breathing had slowed. Her fast breaths were several minutes apart, and then she just stopped. I nod, unable to speak, and then I go over to my mother, reach down, and gently lower her eyelids. I feel waxy and cool under my fingertips. I look down at her face. Goodbye, I call to her silently. In my head, my voice is warm and strong. Goodbye, goodbye, whoever you are. And the reason I wanted to read this to you is because this author has such a genuine voice. Her words are far better than my words in terms of explaining what it was like to go through that with her mother. So the article is from March 2010 called Imperfect Endings by Zoe Fitzgerald Carter. And these are things to consider as you're making decisions or even questions to ask. Think back to these stories that we tell you and think about how can they, or in what way can they apply to the life that you're living. We're so happy to be able to share this knowledge and information with you. We want to be sure, let me find my notes, to thank you for listening. Please stay tuned for future episodes of Everyone Dies. Our thanks to our executive producer, Major General retired David Gillette, our producer, Sandy, John, our technical advisor, Tom Hartman, our administrative advisor, Molly, our Twitter correspondent, and our friends and our family, and our loyal listeners who are supporting our work at Everyone Dies. So Charlie, wherever you are, good night. We look forward to talking to all of you again soon. Remember, every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.